Many years ago, when I was a student in the divinity school, I did a placement as a student chaplain at the Hospital for Sick Children in downtown Toronto. And when you do a placement, you really have little control over what wards you are involved with, and you're basically told what to do. So on my first day, I was told that I was going to be on the hematology ward, that is the kidney dialysis ward, and the oncology ward. So immediately I wanted to run like heck out of that building as quickly as possible. And over the course of the 4 months that I worked there, I came to know a young woman. Her name was Gail. And Gail was suffering from many physical ailments. She had spina bifida, she had some mental capacity issues, she was blind, and she was also suffering from a disease called aplastic anemia. Aplastic anemia was a fairly rare form of bone cancer, bone marrow cancer, and so she was one of the first people to undergo bone marrow transplant, which meant that she had to remain in absolute isolation for months on end. She would be in a double-door room where you had to go through one door, then you would put on scrubs and a hat and a mask and gloves, and then you would go in and you would have your visit. Now Gail also had very little family. She had a brother and she had a mother who lived quite far away, and they would take turns coming to Toronto and staying at Ronald McDonald House and coming to visit her when they could. So Gail really spent a great deal of her time alone. And there were nurses, of course, and many of the nurses there were wonderful and compassionate. They cared about her deeply, but there were an equal number, I remember thinking, who were there just to do their job. And they lacked that capacity to be compassionate and caring. So, as I say, Gail lived a great deal of her time in isolation. She was actually, I think, at some levels, invisible. There was a Broadway play many years ago called Chicago. And in that play, there was a song, and the lyrics went like this. And I think this could describe, by these lyrics, the kind of life that Gail was living. The lyrics went like this. It said, "Everyone gets noticed now and then, unless that person should be invisible, inconsequential me. Mr. Cellophane should have been my name, because you can look right through me, walk right past me, and never know I'm there." Gail died by herself. She was 21 years old. I think those lyrics also would describe the widow in the reading from the Gospel today. You see, in those days, women had no capacity to have any rights. They were non-beings. Unless you had a husband or a married son, you basically didn't exist. And if you were like this widow, in charge of your own finances, that was even worse. So her life must have been a life where she was literally invisible and inconsequential, and yet here she was going to the temple in order to find what she hoped was the support that she desperately needed. And what the temple's role in those days was to collect funds from people and then to distribute them amongst the widows and the orphans and the immigrants and the downtrodden. But unfortunately, there were challenges with that. And like many institutions, and sometimes like our own institutions, there was a sense of corruption. And in the Gospel it reads that Jesus sat across and watched the treasury as the religious authorities in their fancy robes would come and bring and give abundance of money in spite of the fact that they had much more to give. And yet, here's this widow giving everything she had in the hope that she would find the care and the love and the support that she needed. We live in a day and age where, particularly in a town like Oakville or a country like Canada, where most of us spend a good deal of our energy and our time in not being invisible. We spend a great deal of energy and time trying to make something of ourselves that we are noticed. We take a great amount of energy in corporately succeeding or being recognized for the things we accomplish in the world. We don't, any of us, want to be invisible or inconsequential, and yet, you know and I know, there are many, many people in our midst who are as such, who are invisible, and we rarely take notice. There have been many times I've walked downtown Toronto on more than one occasion, and I've walked by people knowing damn well they're sitting there, and what do? I avert my eyes. Why do I avert my eyes? Because I don't want to be bothered sticking my hand in my pocket to get change out. Or I might be in a hurry. Or there may be people who are living on their own, who are lonely, who I know I should actually call just to see if they're doing okay, but oh my gosh, I got to be at a meeting in 15 minutes to make sure that, I get my business done. There are many of us in our midst who live invisibly and inconsequentially. And yet, there's something about the innate human nature that we live to survive on our own. We are remembering today Remembrance Day. We are celebrating Remembrance Day. Throughout the course of human history, from the very first time that human beings stood on their hind legs, war has been part of our reality. Conflict, challenging humans. We have somehow within us the capacity to be cruel one to the other. And it actually takes more energy and time to look beyond oneself. Like this widow who took the risk of coming to the temple to be, she could have at any given moment been ostracized and marginalized or put down. And yet here she was standing up and coming to the temple in order to find the support that she so desperately needed. As human beings, we have to find the capacity within ourselves to find peace within our hearts, within our homes, within our communities, and within our nations. It's a whole lot harder to work for peace than it is to settle for conflict. We celebrate today 100 years since the end of the First World War. The war to end all wars. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of invisible, inconsequential people who went to war on behalf of a cause, a country, and a people that they believed in. They ended up in a particular situation where hundreds of thousands of Canadians lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands of more had their lives changed in a manner in which none of us could ever begin to imagine for ourselves. These invisible people remain as a testimony to the kind of life that we live today. And we need to acknowledge them and to give thanks for their sacrifice, that you and I can live in a manner that allows us to celebrate our own existence. I give thanks for the sacrifice of so many. I pray that you and I can find the capacity to move beyond ourselves, to move out of our silos, to reach out to the lonely, the dispossessed, and the marginalized, to find the energy and the compassion, to recognize that we are all called to love our neighbors as ourselves, to be a faithful follower of Christ. We love God, we love our neighbor, and in that we can only find hope and compassion. Thanks be to God. Amen.